deal with the mitigation issues. So when we build infrastructure, we make sure that we target the green, low carbon infrastructure. But now we are also looking at adaptation and how to scale up the adaptation work. And as you correctly pointed out, adaptation is actually much more complicated than mitigation because it's very much part of our development work. So risk mitigation is one aspect, but what we're trying to do is go very, very upstream and work with our governments during the planning stage to make sure that the adaptation thought is always in the mind and in planning, so that we can integrate, and oftentimes you can reduce risks by avoiding adaptation impacts. So, for example, if you're building a road and it's prone to floods, don't build it there, and things like that. But in order for you to do that, you need to work with expert agencies like Hadley Center and others to give us the information so that we can integrate into the government's planning stage. Now, beyond that, we're also looking at the project stage to make sure that each and every project is designed with the climate change adaptation fully built in. And the example I mentioned to you earlier about the hydropower, now protection of watershed is a major component of the hydropower plant, just as important as the turbine. And then lastly, if you have an infrastructure that's already there and in a disaster-prone area, then we have to do some climate proofing as well.
Thank you very much. So I guess from the bank's point of view, they already have the same concerns in mind. So hopefully we'll be seeing some very concrete results in the near future. Thank you very much. So let's move on to the second question. If you have any more questions. Yes, we have a gentleman on the third row.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ochon. Your speech is very impressive. And I'm very much interested in the point related to the urban planning you mentioned. So we assume the large cities, there's urbanization is moving on, particularly in Asia. But the largest city is, as you pointed out, is vulnerable under the climate change. So my question is, what is your view about the decentralization of large cities as a climate change adaptation? This is my question. Thank you very much.
Before we ask for answers, would you please kindly tell us your name and where you're from?
Okay, sorry. I'm Takashi Hongo. I work at the Mitsui Global Strategic Studies Institute.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that everyone was just curious. Okay, well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Nice to see you, Hongo-san. He's one of the gentlemen who influenced our thinking in terms of climate change. I've known him for many years. It's a very interesting question. ADB recently established our urban development strategy, which talks about promoting the 3 E's, the environment, economy, and equity. So within that framework, we are actually looking at some of the secondary cities and the cities which are emerging, so that we don't clutter everything into one area and promote a design that actually requires people to travel and for everything they do. So this cluster business is something that we are promoting for the cities which are still being designed. But your question is about megacities that's already out there. We can certainly support the cities planners in terms of decentralization effort, so that you can create satellite cities, so that you can attract the businesses and residents to these centers, the satellite centers. But when they do that, we try to incorporate the proper designing there so that it minimizes the need for travel and also take into consideration some of the impacts they may occur with climate change in terms of flooding and other things as well.
Thank you very much. I hope that you are happy with his answer. And now we have a few more minutes, so if you have any more questions, maybe just 1 or 2. Yes, we have a lady here on the third row.
Good morning, hi. My name is Jillian Dzinski. I'm coming from the Adapt Asia Pacific project based in Bangkok here in the region. I have a question for you about finance. To date, I think it's widely recognized there has been significantly more resources put into mitigation than adaptation. Going forward in the future, and particularly in reference to the Emerging Green Climate Fund, how do you see ADB and other banks, in addition to many actors in this region, reconciling the imbalance between adaptation and mitigation financing to date? Thanks.
Yeah, two perspectives on this one. Before we were looking at adaptation, as I mentioned earlier, as sort of climate proofing type of activities, but it's increasingly seen as a main integrated part of the development itself. So it's actually very hard to distinguish adaptation and development, because in fact all of the development has to incorporate adaptation elements. So more and more, our goal is that instead of saying let's get more money for adaptation, as long as we get development partners and the governments, development partners like ourselves and governments in our developing countries, to consider adaptation as an integral part of the development planning, then we see that as a huge success in terms of increasing the finance that's available for adaptation, because you need to use all that. Second is mobilizing private sector investment. We talk about $8 trillion worth of investment needed in Asia and the Pacific region to meet the future economic development in the next 10 years. ADB only has about $15 billion per year, which is a really drop in a bucket, and same thing with the World Bank. They have a bit more, but not too much. So clearly the need for the work in adaptation and also mitigation, it's far bigger than what we can do. So increasingly, we're looking at promoting public-private partnership, and our job from the Multilateral Development Bank is to create the space and certainty for private sector investors to come in. For example, in our disaster risk finance space, we are working with some private sector experts out there, looking at some specific cities to see what is the magnitude of the disaster impacts that a city can have to deal with. So the role that we can play is working with the governments to first recognize that there is a disaster, a climate-related disaster risk in the country, in the city, and do proper assessment of what are the types of disasters, what is the probability, and in the event of such event, what is the impact and loss, potential loss. So we're trying to get some insurance companies to come in at that stage to provide insurance coverage for some of the cities. And those are some of the, and also the other example I mentioned was in the project developer, private sector. Now we have to raise their awareness so that they understand that the benefit you gain out of doing adaptation work for their project is not just a cost, but it's an asset.
Thank you very much. I think your question was in relation to the first question that we had today. So it seems that more and more people are more concerned about what we can actively do in preparation for the future than to just respond and react to what's happening at the moment. I think if there are more questions, we can have one more. Well, I'm sure that our keynote speaker did a great job of giving us a brief and a clear understanding of what he was about to talk today. So I think everyone is very contented. So please give him a big round of applause. Thank you very much. That will conclude the Q&A session. Thank you very much. You may return to your seat. Yes, and together with the end of the Q&A session, this concludes the opening ceremony of the Asia-Pacific Climate Change Adaptation Forum. This is the beginning of a 3-day journey where you'll be talking in depth with each other in regards to the theme that we have for the forum, and also to talk about the bright future that we can also have. Now, before we actually finish and start with a coffee break, I would like to invite the distinguished guests up on the stage once again for our photo session. So please, gentlemen, would you please take your places up on the stage once again?